Something quiet has been happening beneath the surface of modern relationships, and most men don't realize they're participating in it until it's already changed them. You can see it in the way a man texts, the way he apologizes for things he didn't do, the way he rearranges his entire week around her availability, then pretends it was his choice. You can see it in his posture when he talks about her, the way his voice changes when he explains why he hasn't heard back in 3 days. There's a heaviness there that wasn't present 6 months ago. A quiet negotiation is happening inside him that he won't name out loud. I work with men who describe this feeling as background noise. They say everything is fine, the relationship is good, she's great, but something has shifted in the architecture of their lives and they can't quite identify when the foundation cracked. They still go to work. They still see friends occasionally. They still post the right things on social media. But there's a stranger living inside their chest now, someone who waits for replies, who rehearses conversations that never happen, who feels a low-grade anxiety whenever his phone doesn't light up with her name. This stranger is making decisions, small ones at first, cancelling gym sessions because she might be free later, avoiding specific topics because they led to tension last time, laughing at jokes that aren't funny, agreeing to plans he doesn't want. And with each small decision, the man he used to be becomes a little more theoretical, a little less real. This pattern has a logic to it, even if it operates below conscious thought. The man believes he's being emotionally available. He thinks this is what modern relationships require: vulnerability, openness, the willingness to center her emotional experience as the primary navigation system for the relationship. He's been told this is evolution, that the old models were toxic, that genuine intimacy requires this level of transparency and accommodation. And perhaps there's truth in that, but what he doesn't see, what he won't know until it's cost him something irreplaceable, is that emotional availability without boundaries doesn't create attraction. It makes a quiet, creeping form of contempt that neither person wants to admit is happening. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this long before modern dating apps turned human courtship into an optimization problem. Writing in 19th century Germany, watching the machinery of human desire destroy otherwise rational men, he identified something that contradicts almost everything we're told about relationships today. Schopenhauer saw romantic love not as the path to fulfillment, but as nature's most sophisticated trapper biological imperative disguised as personal choice. A script written by the will to life that uses individual happiness as currency it has no intention of honoring. In his view, the man who surrenders his autonomy to romantic desire doesn't ascend to a higher form of connection. He descends into a form of voluntary servitude that feels like freedom only because he's been chemically rewarded for accepting his chains. Here is the truth that runs through this entire examination, the thesis that explains why detachment still attracts women more than emotional availability. A man who makes a woman's emotional world the center of his own slowly becomes the kind of man she cannot respect, because attraction is not a reward for devotion. It is a response to the presence of something that remains outside her control. This isn't cruelty. This isn't game playing. This is the fundamental architecture of desire itself, operating according to principles that predate modern ideology by millennia. Schopenhauer called it the will, the blind driving force beneath all life that cares nothing for individual happiness and everything for the continuation of the species. And the will has equipped women with a detection system more sophisticated than anything we've built technologically in instinct, that within moments of interaction can sense whether a man possesses a center of gravity independent of her approval. The man in the opening of this examination doesn't understand this yet. He believes that if he communicates more clearly, responds more quickly, and demonstrates more care, the anxiety will eventually resolve, and the relationship will stabilize the partnership he imagined. He reads articles about attachment theory. He learns the language of emotional labor and mental load. He begins to monitor his own behavior through her lens, wondering if he's doing enough, being enough, showing up correctly. And with each adjustment, each recalibration of his behavior to match what he believes she needs, he moves further from the man she was initially attracted to and closer to, a figure she'll later describe to friends as too nice, lacking edge, or simply not feeling it anymore. This transformation happens in stages, though the man experiencing it never sees the borders between them. First comes the initial intoxication, where his attention on her feels like intensity, like the kind of focused presence that romance novels describe. She responds to this attention because it's still coming from a man who has other things in his life, different concerns, different purposes. His attention is valuable precisely because it's limited. After all, when he focuses on her, he's choosing to redirect energy that could go elsewhere. But somewhere in the early months, a shift occurs. Imperceptible at first, he starts checking his phone more frequently. He begins to feel a small spike of anxiety when she doesn't respond within an expected time frame. He notices himself thinking about her at work, not in brief moments of pleasant anticipation, but in extended loops of analysis, planning, and worry. The second stage is negotiation, though he'd never call it that. He tells himself he's being considerate when he changes his Friday plans to accommodate her schedule. He tells himself he's being mature when he apologizes, expressing frustration about something that legitimately bothered him. He tells himself he's being emotionally intelligent when he spends an hour crafting a text that addresses her concerns with perfect calibration. But what's really happening is a subtle transfer of power, a reordering of priority systems, a slow dissolution of the boundaries that made him attractive in the first place. Schopenhauer would immediately recognize the will to begin writing the man's decisions for him, using the promise of sexual and romantic fulfillment as the ink. I once spoke to a man who described this period with frightening precision. He said it felt like he was constantly trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. Every time he thought he'd figured out what she needed, more quality time, more verbal affirmation, more initiative in planning, dates the target would shift, and he'd find himself starting over. What he didn't realize was that from inside the pattern, he could see the puzzle wasn't solvable because he was asking the wrong question. She didn't need more of his attention. She needed him to have something in his life that mattered more than her approval. She needed to feel that if she walked away, something significant would remain in his world, that his identity and purpose weren't contingent on her presence. But he'd already abandoned that territory. His gym routine had become sporadic, his personal projects had gone dormant, his friendships had faded to occasional text exchanges. He'd reorganized his entire existence around the relationship, and then wondered why the relationship felt increasingly fragile. The third stage is the one most men don't want to acknowledge until they're looking at it in the rearview mirror. It's the stage where self-abandonment becomes the default setting, where his internal navigation system has been so thoroughly recalibrated to her emotional weather patterns that he's lost access to his own instincts. He no longer knows what he wants, independent of what she wants. He no longer knows what he believes, independent of what will create harmony. He's become a reactor, a responder, a man perpetually in the position of emotional defense, explaining, justifying, and reassuring. And she, sensing the shift at a level beneath language, begins to withdraw. Not dramatically, not with a clear explanation, just a subtle cooling, a decrease in responsiveness, a quality in her eyes that wasn't there before, a kind of disappointed confusion, as if she's mourning something she can't quite name. This is where Schopenhauer's philosophy cuts deepest. He argued that romantic love is fundamentally deceptive. It presents itself as the path to transcendence while, in fact, serving as the will's mechanism for reproduction, indifferent to whether the individuals involved find lasting happiness. The man who has reorganized life around a woman believes he's investing in a future of shared meaning and mutual fulfillment. But what he's actually done is make himself dependent on a source of validation that human biology has designed to be unstable, conditional, and withdrawn the moment he needs it most. The woman doesn't consciously choose to lose attraction. It happens automatically, below the level of deliberate thought, because her instincts are registering a man who has made himself too available, too malleable, too lacking in the autonomy that signals genetic fitness and emotional resilience. Here's what actually creates the experience we call attraction. Stripped of romantic mythology, it's the presence of something withheld, something that remains outside immediate access. something that suggests the man has an internal world, an external purpose that will continue whether she participates or not. This doesn't mean coldness, cruelty, or manipulative withdrawal. It means the preservation of self, the maintenance of boundaries, the refusal to dissolve one's identity into the relationship, even when every emotional impulse is screaming to do precisely that. The man who can sit with her disappointment without immediately moving to fix it, who can hear her criticism without reflexively apologizing, and who can allow tension to exist without scrambling to resolve it through his own diminishment. This is the man who remains interesting, whose attention retains value, whose presence continues to generate the chemical responses that sustain long-term attraction. But modern culture has systematically destroyed most men's ability to maintain this position. We built an entire therapeutic and social apparatus that tells men their worth is measured by emotional compliance, that healthy relationships require constant verbal processing, and that any form of detachment or independence is actually avoidance and fear of intimacy. Men are told to lead with vulnerability, to center women's emotional experiences, to treat relationships as the primary organizing principle of adult life. And then these same men are confused when the women in their lives seem perpetually dissatisfied, when passion fades into companionate tolerance, when attraction dies a quiet death that no amount of communication can revive. I work with men in their 30s and 40s who are waking up to this pattern after years of playing by rules that consistently produce the opposite of what they were promised. They describe relationships where they did everything right according to the contemporary manual. They communicated, they compromised, they showed up emotionally, and still found themselves sitting across from a woman who looked at them with something closer to friendly indifference than desire. These men often blame themselves, assuming they failed in execution rather than questioning whether the framework itself might be flawed. But Schopenhauer would say they succeeded perfectly at the wrong game, that they mastered a script designed to make them controllable and comfortable, not attractive and respected. Zoom out from individual relationships, and you see this pattern operating at a civic level. The modern sexual marketplace has created conditions that amplify every element of this dynamic. Dating apps give women access to a seemingly unlimited pool of male attention, raising the baseline threshold for what counts as valuable. Social media allows constant comparison, constant measurement against ideal standards, and constant awareness of other options. The legal and cultural environment has made male initiative increasingly risky, where a man's attempt to express interest can be reframed as harassment, where marriage is a contract that penalizes in divorce at catastrophic rates, and where custody defaults to mothers and financial obligations to fathers. Men are told to be emotionally available while being given every rational reason to protect themselves, to withhold, to maintain strategic distance. And so a split emerges in male behavior. Some men, usually those with access to resources and options, learn to navigate this environment by maintaining a detachment that paradoxically attracts. They keep their mission central. They enforce boundaries. They allow women to experience uncertainty. They refuse to play emotional negotiation games. These men are often labeled toxic or emotionally unavailable by the same women who consistently choose them over more accommodating alternatives. Other men, believing the explicit rules they've been taught, lead with availability and accommodation and find themselves in the exact pattern we opened, with good men, decent men, men who would make loyal partners, watching women choose a series of worse options while receiving friendly rejection after friendly rejection. Schopenhauer would see this as the will operating with perfect efficiency. The traits that make a man a stable long-term partner, reliability, emotional availability, willingness to compromise, are not the same traits that generate initial attraction and sexual desire. Biology doesn't care about your happiness in year 7 of marriage. It cares about genetic diversity, about displays of fitness, about securing the strongest possible material for offspring. A man's willingness to restructure his life around a woman's emotional needs might signal his potential as a provider. Still, it doesn't signal the kind of autonomy and resilience that biological instincts are scanning for. And so women find themselves in a bind. They rarely articulate attracted to men who remain slightly out of reach, but wanting to build lives with men who are fully present and accommodating. These are often not the same men. The cost of staying blind to this dynamic is not just romantic failure, it's the erosion of self-respect, the gradual loss of the internal compass that allows a man to move through the world with clarity and purpose. When a man makes female approval the measure of his worth, he becomes hostage to forces outside his control. His mood becomes dependent on her responsiveness. His sense of identity becomes conditional on her validation. He begins to experience his own life as something happening to him rather than something he's authoring. This is the deeper violence of the pattern. Not that he fails to get the girl, but that in trying to keep her through self-abandonment, he loses access to the person he was before the relationship began to reshape him. I've seen men in this state become paranoid, reading subtext into every interaction, analyzing and timing with the intensity of intelligence analysts. I've seen them become bitter, developing a quiet resentment toward the women they're trying to please. A resentment they can't express because it contradicts the image of the emotionally evolved man they're trying to embody. I've seen them become numb, going through the motions of relationship maintenance while feeling nothing except a dull background anxiety that never quite resolves. And underneath all of it is the same fundamental error. The belief that if he finds the right combination of behaviors, the right level of attentiveness, the right balance of presence and independence, he can engineer attraction through effort and intention. But attraction doesn't work that way. It's not a puzzle to be solved or a skill to be mastered. It's a response to the presence of qualities that cannot be faked or manufactured through technique. The genuinely detached man not performing detachment as a strategy, but actually possessing a center of gravity independent of female approval, emanates a frequency that biological instincts recognize. He doesn't need to play hard to get. He doesn't need to create scarcity or manipulate perception artificially. His attention is naturally limited because he has other things that matter to him. His boundaries are naturally firm because he has standards he won't compromise. His emotional availability is naturally selective because he's not desperately seeking validation from external sources. This is where practical integration must begin, not with tactics or techniques, but with the recovery of a sovereign self that exists before and independent of romantic relationships. Notice when you're changing your schedule to accommodate her without her asking. Notice when you're editing your thoughts before you speak them, running internal calculations about how she'll receive your words. Notice that when you're apologizing for differences that differ from hers, you're treating your own needs as negotiable while treating hers as fixed requirements. These are the moments when self-abandonment happens in real time, when you're training her to view you as an extension of her will rather than as a separate person with autonomous desires and boundaries. Stop pretending that constant availability equals care. Genuine care requires the preservation of self. A man who has nothing in his life except the relationship brings no value to the relationship. He brings need, disguised as love. He brings dependency, disguised as devotion. The woman who receives this kind of attention might accept it, might even come to rely on it, but she won't feel attraction toward it. She'll feel a low-grade obligation mixed with vague disappointment, a sense that she's somehow trapped in something that was supposed to remain wild, begin to move as if your mission, whatever that is for you, whether it's building a business, mastering a craft, developing your physical capacity, contributing to something larger than yourself, is the fixed point around which everything else, including romantic relationships, must orbit. Refuse to engage in emotional negotiations where you're expected to justify your boundaries, explain why you need time alone, or defend your decision to prioritize other than her immediate comfort. The frame itself is wrong. You're not on trial. You're not required to make a case for your autonomy. A woman who respects you won't demand constant explanation and reassurance. She'll observe your behavior, test your boundaries occasionally, the way all humans do, and adjust her approach based on what she learns about where you're solid and where you're permeable. But if you've already established a pattern of bending every time she expresses discomfort, you've taught her that your boundaries are negotiable and your priorities are conditional. Allow her to experience uncertainty. Allow her to wonder occasionally whether you'll still be there if she doesn't treat the relationship with care. This isn't about creating artificial drama or playing games. It's about refusing to rush in and rescue her from the natural consequences of her choices. If she's dismissive or disrespectful, don't immediately smooth it over with understanding and accommodation. Let the tension exist. Let her sit with the reality that her behavior affects your interest level, that you're not a guaranteed presence regardless of how she treats you. Most men have been so thoroughly conditioned to avoid conflict and prioritize that they've lost the ability to let a woman experience their displeasure. They rush to reconnect, to reassure, to restore equilibrium. And in doing so, they communicate that there are no real consequences, that the relationship will continue on her terms regardless of what she does. Protect your attention as if it's currency, because in the modern attention economy, it's the most valuable thing you possess. Every hour you spend in text conversations that go nowhere is an hour you didn't spend building something real. Every evening you spend waiting for her to be available is an evening you didn't invest in your physical training, your skill set, or your brotherhood with other men. The men who remain attractive over time are the ones who treat their attention as scarce and their time as non-renewable. They're not rude or dismissive. They're simply clear about what they're willing to invest and what they expect in return. And when the exchange rate becomes unfavorable, they're eager to walk away without extended explanation or negotiation. Begin to move as if you're interviewing her for a position in your life, not auditioning for a role in hers. This simple frame shift changes everything. You're no longer performing for approval. You're evaluating compatibility. You're assessing whether her presence adds to or detracts from the life you're building. You're watching how she responds to your boundaries, whether she respects your time, whether she brings genuine enthusiasm, or whether she treats you as an emotional utility that should always be available for her processing needs. Most men enter relationships from a position of scarcity, grateful that a woman is giving them attention, afraid to have standards or expectations. This is the beginning of the pattern we've been examining. The sovereign man enters from a position of sufficiency, curious about whether this particular woman deserves access to his world. Two paths lie ahead of you, and the choice you make in the next few months will determine which version of yourself you become. The first path is continuation. You can keep doing what you're doing. Keep believing that if you love harder, communicate better, show up more consistently, eventually it will click into place. 5 years from now, you'll be smaller, more confused, more bitter. You'll have a catalogue of relationships that followed the same pattern, where initial attraction faded into friendly tolerance and then into quiet endings that you couldn't quite explain. You'll describe yourself as a good man who tries hard, and you'll wonder why that never seems to be enough. You'll watch other men who seem less considerate, less emotionally available, less devoted succeed with women who rejected you. Cognitive dissonance will slowly poison your view of relationships. You'll either become cynical, deciding that women don't actually want what they say they want, or you'll become more accommodating, doubling down on the strategy that isn't working. Either way, you'll lose yourself in the process. The second path is initiation. You can take everything in this examination as a mirror that reveals the places where you've abandoned yourself in exchange for approval. You can begin the difficult work of recovering boundaries, of rebuilding a life where romantic relationships are necessary but not central, where your sense of worth comes from internal achievement and external contribution rather than from a woman's validation. This path is more challenging, at least initially. You'll have to sit with discomfort. You'll have to allow relationships to end that might have continued if you've been willing to keep compromising. You'll have to watch women walk away when you enforce boundaries and resist the urge to chase them. You'll have to rebuild friendships you neglected. You'll have to return to disciplines you abandoned. You'll have to face the reality that you might be alone for a while as you recalibrate who you are and what you're building. But 5 years from now, if you walk this path with consistency, you'll be different in ways that matter. You'll have fewer people in your life, but deeper connections with the ones who remain. You'll have less drama, less anxiety, and less of the constant low-grade tension that comes from trying to manage someone else's emotional weather. You'll move through the world with a quiet solidity that other people respond to without quite knowing why. Women will sense something different in you, not a technique you've learned or a persona you're performing, but an actual independence that can't be faked. And paradoxically, because you've stopped organizing, you're organizing under female approval, you'll become more attractive to higher quality women who are drawn to men with a mission and boundaries. The respect you receive from others, particularly from women, will be a direct reflection of the respect you hold for yourself. If you tolerate disrespect, accept inconsistency, and remain available to someone who treats your time and attention as low value, you're teaching her to perceive you that way. And the lesson she learns, not consciously, not deliberately, but through the reliable mechanism of human instinct, is that you don't value yourself highly enough to enforce standards. This creates a downward spiral where her respect decreases, which makes you try harder to please her, which reduces her respect further. The only way to stop this cycle is to become willing to lose the relationship rather than lose yourself. This isn't an ultimatum or a negotiation tactic. It's a fundamental reordering of priorities that changes everything about how you show up. Schopenhauer's great insight was that the will to life uses individual happiness as a false promise to achieve its reproductive aims, and that freedom lies in seeing through the deception, in recognizing the script and refusing to let it write your decisions. For the modern man, this means understanding that romantic attraction is not primarily about emotional availability, communicative skill, or devotion. It's about the presence of qualities that signal autonomy, resilience, and purpose, qualities that erode the moment you make a woman's approval the center of your world. The detachment that attracts women isn't coldness, indifference, or manipulative game playing. It's the natural result of having built a life worth protecting, a mission worth pursuing, a self that won't be abandoned for the promise of romantic fulfillment. Here is the mirror held up to you one final time. She does not kill your purpose. She reflects its absence. The woman in your life is not your enemy. She's not consciously trying to destroy your autonomy or drain your vitality. She's responding to what you present, testing the boundaries you set, measuring the solidity of the frame you build. If you've made her the center, if you've dissolved your identity into the relationship, if you've abandoned the territories that made you interesting, she's simply reacting to the vacuum where a sovereign man used to stand. The loss of attraction you experience, the slow cooling of desire, the disappointed confusion in her eyes, these are not personal failures. They're the natural consequences of violating a fundamental principle that predates modern ideology by millennia. Attraction requires the presence of something that remains outside immediate control. And you cannot give women what they honestly respond to by making yourself endlessly available and malleable. If this examination disturbed something in you, if it named a pattern you've been living without language to describe it, then share it with men who need to hear it. Subscribe to keep this work alive, and return to these ideas when you feel yourself slipping back into the comfortable lies that our culture tells about relationships. The truth is more complicated to live than the fantasy, but it's the only foundation solid enough to build a life on. A man who cannot bear to disappoint a woman will eventually disappoint himself so thoroughly that she loses interest in both versions.